Ivanhoe plot and structure. The plot of Ivanhoe is this, that Ivanhoe is a follower of King Richard I, who has gone away to fight the crusade. He returns to England to find England in chaos in the hand of the king who has been appointed by the absentee king. Prince John is the new ruler, and he has allowed the situation in the country to degenerate. And the first chapters of this novel are mainly expository. So, we are introduced to a whole lot of characters through the first couple of chapters in this story. And then we find that Norman nobles are abusing their powers. They have developed an animosity against the Saxons, and they are always trying to overcome the Saxons and put them down in some way or the other. And in this period, we have a Saxon lord who is Cedric. Cedric is none other than Ivanhoe's father, and Cedric is completely intolerant of anything which is Norman. Cedric has gone to the extent of disowning his own son. No wonder he is now been named as the disinherited knight, because he has lost out inheritance of his father, and only because Ivanhoe had expressed his love for beautiful Rowena, who is also Cedric's ward. Now, Cedric does not want Rowena to be married to Ivanhoe for a reason which is beyond anything which is personal. He wishes that someday a pure line of Saxon kings are established on the throne of England, and none can be better to claim this place than Athelstane. There is only other person, Rowena, and if Rowena and Athelstane are married, then there can be no challenge to kingship, and this would bring back the Saxon rule, which is what Cedric wants. Now, if this is the introduction, we have a rising action. The rising action begins as soon as Du Bois appears on the scene, and we have a meeting of Du Bois with Wamba and Gurth, the two servants of Cedric, and there is conversation between the two. It is the rising action develops that the Norman party will demand a place in Cedric's castle for the stormy night and hospitality there, and then from there the entire party goes to Ashby to attend the tournament. And in this tournament, Ivanhoe, disguised as a knight who is fighting 5 combatants, appears and defeats all Norman knights in an unprecedented sort of show of bravery and chivalry. The climax is very close. When Cedric's party now on their way home from Ashby tournament are imprisoned, they are taken to the Torquestone and castle, and the climax is helped when the rope changing happens between the servant and Cedric, who are now runs away from the castle in disguise of his servant to join King Richard to inform Richard about the developments within the castle of what is happening befallen the Saxons. Then we have the contest coming, and in the contest somebody has to rescue Rebecca from the hand of the Normans, who are nothing but enemies to the Saxon people and who are nothing but villainous by nature. And in the end, when we find the Du Bois falling down and dying, he has almost purged himself, bringing an end to this climactic part of the story. From this climax, the story begins a downward journey, what we would like to call as a falling action. And in this falling action, we have King Richard, or as Black Knight he is known so far in the novel. He is revealing himself to the people of England. He is given back the throne. King John is forced to abdicate in favor of the rightful king. And now is the time for the Saxon Lord Cedric also to accept that Saxons can never once again reclaim the English throne, that the English throne forever now belongs to the Norman kings. So he listens to Athelstane's request and gives permission to Rowena to get married to Ivanhoe. Scott's style in the novel. That is what we are going to now discuss. Scott is an outstanding storyteller. He divides the plot into period, into atmosphere, into colorful description. There are a lot of chivalry customs that he discusses, which are probably taken from French tradition and introduced into England. Throughout the novel, the prose that he writes successfully captures the use of the medieval, although the language that he uses is not medieval at all. Now, why does he do that? He does that because the pleasure giving part of the novel is very important to the novel writer, because the ultimate goal of a novel is to please its reader. So, he uses some of these colloquialism into his cleverly crafted novel to give it the flavor which is remote while it is identifiable, showing that for the first time we have an author who actually knows how to write a historical fiction, which is not history, which is not completely fiction, and yet blends the two in the most viable manner. I'll give you a few examples of this by reading it out to you. For example, he introduces chapter 3 with Thomson's Liberty Coat. He writes, "Then, sad relief, from the bleak coast the German Ocean roar, deep, blooming strong, and yellow-haired, the blue-eyed Saxon came." Very predictably, the chapter goes on to describe Cedric, the Saxon lord, father of Ivanhoe, who we know has a large blue eyes and long yellow hair. Then again, in chapter 5, he quotes from Merchant of Venice. This particular chapter obviously goes on to describe the Jew, Isaac, and he talks about Isaac. Before he talks about Isaac, he uses this famous quote of Shakespeare from Merchant of Venice, which says, "Hath not Jew eyes?" And it's a beautiful way to move into his description of how Isaac as a Jew is discriminated against by a society dominated by the Christians. So he goes into very detailed descriptions to keep the reader's attention constantly with him. Then we have a huge cast of characters. We know about, it's more than 100 characters are built into this novel, and they weave in and out of the novel at any point in time. But he carries each one of the characters, each group of the characters. They reach a certain level and then again he leaves them. For a while he abandons those set of characters, picking up yet another set, exploring them, describing them, talking about their feats in different adventures, and then he begins to follow another set of characters or bring back the first set of character. Flashback, the missing details that there might be in the story, because he doesn't follow a narrative structure which is from the beginning to the end. What he does is he brings in flashback. Missing details are nicely filled out. The novel never feels that it is broken, that it is disjointed. I will talk about this constant disjointed thing in describing the end of chapter 21, chapter 23, chapter 24. All these chapters end when there is a bugle call which is heard. You know, chapter 22 talks about Isaac who's being tortured. Chapter 23 is talking about Debrassi who's with Rowena, and Rowena is weeping to be saved from Debrassi. Chapter 25 is about Rebecca and Boyce de Gilbert, and where Rebecca tells that I will jump from the parapet of the castle unless you stop pursuing me. But all the 4 chapters, even chapter 21 for that matter, the end of chapter 21 is about Cedric who is feeling absolute despair. And all these chapters end when the bugle call is heard. Another technique which he uses is that as a masterful storyteller, he will use the characters, the cast of characters. Some of the characters are historical, as I already said, and that is something very, very unique, and that is what makes Scott such a popular novelist of his time and also in our times as well. We will now discuss the mood and tenor of this particular novel. That throughout this novel, the excitement is palpable, and it goes from one exciting part to the next exciting part. Although there are a lot of descriptions built into the novel, you never stop relating to the excitement which keeps coming, the adventure. That is what makes Ivanhoe a successful adventure story. It is something the 19th century audience, the readers, were completely unaware of, and yet because of the excitement of the mood, that the chivalric traditions, the tale of bravery that the author is able to build into his novel, people can actually read through it with a lot of pleasure, beginning in the first page, ending at the last page. And we haven't completely lost touch with the history. It is fiction, all right, the reader knows it's fiction, but there is the historical background. And whenever, for example, the shouting of a crowd proclaiming death is preferred to defeat and such chivalry codes, the reader almost feels animated enough to react to it in the same manner as the crowd has done. And Ivanhoe also disguises. Now, in the disguise that Ivanhoe takes as the disinherited knight, he is a very symbol of all the chivalry code that existed in the medieval ages. So, when there is complaints about Ivanhoe being actually misleading, because Ivanhoe really is not the central character in this story. The central character of the story is nobody but, I think, the historical element of the story. That is the central character. And let's say, for example, he takes into account the careless attitude of a knight to his physical discomfort, to cruelty, to torture, to misfortune which is falling. It's a true tradition of the medieval knight. The medieval knights that we read about in any other work of art, how they have learned to sacrifice their personal comfort for the sake of larger good. That is what medieval age authenticated, and that is what Scott also tries to portray through his novel. Then coming to the fact that Ivanhoe is romantic. There is a romance built into it. The romance is on one side between Ivanhoe and also Rowena, who have been childhood friends. They have grown up together, so therefore they love each other. It's a beautiful, pure romanticism. Then there is another mood building effort that Scott makes is the pageantry, the big spectacle. Every event that he presents, he adds description of dress, description of armor, the horses, the weapons, how they are moving, what is happening to them, what is the decoration on the wall of a castle is, what are the tapestries that the women are stitching. Everything together makes these become the very conspicuous forces in this particular novel of heritage and of history of this period that he wants to present. The topic we are going to now talk about is politics and chivalry in the novel Ivanhoe. Chivalry is a concern in the novel. Scott treats the ideal of chivalry with some kind of a disrespect. It's not as if he much cares for the ideals of chivalry. He represents chivalry through characters who are mainly Norman. Beowulf, de Boissy, de Bois, all these characters are shown to be corrupt. They are Knight Templars. They are supposed to be secular in many sense, but they are not. The only two characters who are chivalric and as well as earns our respect and esteem are Ivanhoe and Richard. But even then, Ivanhoe may be above any criticism because being the ideal representative of Saxon values. But King Richard's character also comes under tremendous criticism by the author, because Richard has abandoned his country. Richard has gone to fight the Crusades and has not taken care of his primary duty as a king to look after his subjects. And he has left his subjects not in the hand of somebody he actually should have, not in the hand of a trusted man, not in the hand of somebody who is good, but somebody like Prince John, who is a rogue character himself. And in the hand of this rogue character, it is found that England at this point in time has degenerated into a political system of chaos. That brings us to discussion of the politics in this particular novel, and we will have a look at that also in this particular discussion analysis of ours. Let us have a look at this. The major theme is about the political chaos. Now, king's absence has created political chaos. Forests are full of outlaws, and unrest has spread all over the country. And it is, although unknown in the 19th century, it's good to keep in mind that Walter Scott is using these social conflict, that in case there are two groups which are eventually are meant to live, coexist together and are not able to get along together, will create a lot of disturbance in the entire social structure of the country of that time. And it is an aspect of civilization which should be avoided, and therefore Scott advises through the novel, through depicting the conflict between the Norman and Saxons, what he wants to be avoided, what he does not want to be included by his contemporary society. We will discuss
Anti-Semitism,
the unjust treatment of the Jews. Now, that is reflected in the character of Rebecca and Isaac being ill-treated by no matter which Englishmen. It could be Normans, it could be Saxons, it could be the servants, or it could be the lords. Everybody is almost unified in their anti-Semitic feelings. And in the end, even as we find that a new political order is established, King Richard is accepted as a Norman king by the Saxon lords, the Jews are not to be included in this. And that is the reason Scott was aware that the Jewish persecution and the plight of the Jews in the 12th century England was very much a reality, and they have to be thrown out of the harmony which has been established. So there were very few Jews in England before 1066. William the Conqueror invited the first set of Jews from France to come and settle down in England. But Jews were not given any kind of rights. From your reading of Merchant of Venice, you know that they dealt with trade, they dealt with money lending as and sometimes with medicine. And Catholics always considered that Jews were doing a lot of sinful activity. That is, they were using money lending. Usury was a sin for the Christians. And Ivanhoe builds in the heart of the characters such feelings which are exposed that makes people react to the goodness of Isaac or the beauty of Rebecca with a lot of suspicion. And there is everything beautiful about Rebecca, but except for the fact she is Jewish. And because she is a Jewess, she cannot be the central character. But she has no future in England. She will have to leave Ivanhoe and she will have to go away to some other part of the world where she is accepted better. It is also a story about a Saxon father, Cedric, who had in the beginning disowned his son. And even that disowning father accepts the son. Not only the son, but because the son has sided with the Norman king, the disowning father has now moved to accepting even the king, accepting in totality that the Saxons can never again come back to power. But it's the same society, the same people who will not accept a Jew in the society. We will now discuss two most important characters of Ivanhoe. The first is Ivanhoe himself, and the other character is that of Rowena. Then we will go on to discuss the next lot of important characters. Now, what is Ivanhoe's character? Ivanhoe will accept Norman rule if it is a just rule, if it is a merciful rule, as represented in King Richard. King Richard who is merciful, King Richard who is sympathetic. And we find that in this sense, Scott's enormous knowledge of history and chivalry goes into portrayal of his character of Ivanhoe. He becomes the ideal knight. Although I have already said that chivalry is a tradition that Scott is not particularly fond of, still in Ivanhoe he praises those aspects of chivalry which are praiseworthy. and the novel ends in joy for that is the reason why the Ivanhoe's life ends in the novel with a lot of joy. He gets to win his love. Nearly lost love of Rowena is come back to him, and he goes on to take up the various tasks that King Richard assigns him, asserting that Ivanhoe will have a life which is extremely fruitful, and as long as King Richard is there, he will lead a very life of an ideal knight, and is not going to be denied in anything. Rowena, on the other hand, very strong moral character, which makes her a noble heroine. She's tried. There is an attempt of molestation by De Bracy, but she will not yield. She will not give up. She resists his advances, and then when he asks for forgiveness, she is also ready to forgive him. She does not let go of her love for Ivanhoe, even in the long absence in Ivanhoe through her life. And although she has this sense that she can sense with her womanly instinct, she knows that Rebecca has also fallen in love with her husband, she is able to adjust to that. She can accept Rebecca's apology, and she is absolutely gracious about saying a goodbye to Rebecca. So that is what makes her an ideal role for a heroine of a historical novel. She understands Cedric, but she will not sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of a goal, a Saxon goal. She will assert her right to experience fulfillment in life, and showing the tremendous moral courage that she as a heroine has in this novel. And therefore, we will find that you have to agree that you may not accept Rowena as the best match for Ivanhoe, but morally she is an equal match. She is an equally strong lady to be a perfect match to noble Ivanhoe. Lastly, I will discuss the character of Rebecca. Everybody falls in love with the character of Rebecca. She is a beautiful Jewess. I do not know if you have seen the film of Ivanhoe, but it is even more poignant when you see the visualized version of Rebecca. Please go and watch the movie and find out yourself. She is a very well educated woman. She is skilled in medicine. She is not interested in money. She is ready to give out money, unlike her father, who is conscious and is more careful about spending his money. She can distribute her love, her affection, and her charity and her service, irrespective of the religion of a person. And when she nurses Ivanhoe back to health, she falls in love with this noble man. And yet she accepts that, being a Jewess, she cannot express her love to Ivanhoe, who in his chivalric tradition might feel that it is his duty to accept and reciprocate that love, which will not in the larger social cycle be accepted. So she hides her love. She knows that in England her love for a Christian will never either be accepted or appreciated. She keeps it to herself. She when at the end she wants to thank Ivanhoe for having fought a battle for her, actually saved her life, she does not go to Ivanhoe at all. The nobility of her nature takes her to Rowena, who has already been wedded to Ivanhoe, and she expresses her gratitude for what Ivanhoe and Rowena has done for her. This moment of encounter between Rebecca and Rowena takes Rebecca to a height of goodness which rarely any heroine in any novel has ever able to attain. And let us take into account the fact when Rebecca is a prisoner in hand of Bois de Gilbert. Rebecca is firm against him. She will not give up her religion. She will not give up her identity, even though if it means that she will have to die for sake of it. She is extremely strong in her belief of what is her own identity as a Jewish person is. She admires Du Bois. She admires because at one point in time she finds Du Bois is her only ally in the whole world, and but she cannot accept him. Ivanhoe, we can see, greatly respects Rebecca. He may not fall in love with her, but that doesn't reduce his sense of respect for her. And many of us believe, as I have repeatedly told you, that Rebecca should have been matched to Ivanhoe instead of Rowena. But Rebecca is extremely gracious a lady. She will not outstep her limit, and she will stay exactly where she should and make her exit as gracefully as possible. If this wraps up that entire lesson of Ivanhoe for you. I thank you very much for being here, and I hope you have understood the lesson.